Hey guys, how's it going? Master Cal here, and today I'm going to be doing the third video of my 2021 NFL offseason recap series, the Houston Texans. So, the Texans, after a very disappointing season a year after they were leading the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs by a score of 24-0, they blew that lead in the divisional round, and then they had an abysmal season. They started off 0-4, fired head coach Bill O'Brien, and wound up winning just 4 games the rest of the way. As O'Brien kind of messed up the team significantly with all the trades he did, specifically that DeAndre Hopkins trade last offseason that completely backfired. And so Nick Caserio is now the general manager of the team, and for head coach they brought in David Coley, who was the passing game coordinator, assistant head coach for the Baltimore Ravens last year. Guy who has a lot of experience as an assistant coach, but he gets his first head coaching job. I think he's like 63 years old right now. They elected to keep offensive coordinator Tim Kelly in that role, potentially to placate Deshaun Watson, even though one of the stories this offseason has been Watson's desire to get traded out of Houston, and we'll talk about that later on in this video. And the legal situation going on with him and all that. And then for defensive coordinator, they brought in Lovie Smith, the former head coach of the I think he was the head coach of the Chicago Bears and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and most recently he was with the University of Illinois, but he becomes the defensive coordinator of the Houston Texans now. So the free agents the Texans were able to retain, safety A.J. Moore was brought back at the original round level as a restricted free agent, so 1 year, $2.133 million. He's a key depth piece for them. Tight end Pharaoh Brown was brought back as a restricted free agent on a 1-year deal worth $1.6 million, $200,000 of it guaranteed. Cornerback Vernon Hargraves was re-signed to a 1-year deal worth $1.5 million up to $2 million, $500,000 guaranteed. He was their starting slot corner for much of last year, former first-round pick of the Buccaneers, but he has struggled for the most part in the NFL. Running back Buddy Howell, one of their key special teamers, was brought back as a restricted free agent. 1 year, $1.5 million up to $1.8 million, $200,000 guaranteed. Long snapper John Weeks was re-signed to a 1-year deal worth $1.2125 million with $250,000 guaranteed. Cornerback Cornell Armstrong was brought back as a restricted free agent. 1 year, $1.15 million, $100,000 guaranteed. And running back Dontrell Hilliard was brought back as a restricted free agent as well. 1 year, $1.12 million with $80,000 guaranteed. He was a midseason waiver claim from the Cleveland Browns and a guy who can be in the mix in the return game. So the Texans this offseason, they didn't have a lot of cap space or draft picks as a result of the moves that O'Brien made. And so what Caserio did in his first year on the job was he signed a whole ton of veterans to short-term deals, inexpensive short-term deals. So they have a lot of free agent additions. The biggest signing was actually to a punter. Former Eagle Cameron Johnson was signed to a 3-year deal worth $8 million, $3 million of it guaranteed. The Eagles, who were in a much worse cap situation than the Texans were not able to afford to bring him back. So the Texans decided to come in and get him. Linebacker Kevin Pierre-Louis was signed to a 2-year deal worth $7 million up to $8 million, $2.75 million guaranteed. He's a pretty key special teamer who has seen some playing time over his years. He's played for Washington, he's played for the Jets, he's played for the Chiefs, he's played for the Bears, and he's played for the Seahawks as well. Cornerback Terrence Mitchell was signed to a 2-year deal worth $6.5 million up to $7.5 million and $3 million guaranteed. Mitchell was a full-time starter last year for the Browns because of the injury to Greedy Williams, and he was okay enough, so the Texans decided to bring him in to bolster a weak cornerback room. Former New York Jets edge rusher Jordan Jenkins was signed to a 2-year deal worth $6 million, $1 million guaranteed. Jenkins had a disappointing 2020 season after having his sack total increase every year. He had been in the league from 2016 to 2019, so he'll hope to get back on track in Houston. Veteran return man Andre Roberts was signed to a 2-year deal worth $5.5 million up to $5.6 million, $2.5 million guaranteed. Spent the last couple of years with the Buffalo Bills. Quarterback Tyrod Taylor was signed to a one-year deal worth $5.5 million, $2.5 million guaranteed. Started one game last year for the Chargers, and then he had that mysterious puncture. I think lung puncture was what it was, something like that. That forced Justin Herbert into the starting lineup, and Herbert impressed and didn't relinquish starting job. So Taylor comes in to be an experienced backup, plus potentially compete on the starting role, depending on Watson's legal situation. Defensive tackle Malik Collins, former Cowboy and Raider, was signed to a one-year deal worth $5 million, $2 million guaranteed. Cornerback Tavier Thomas, another former Brown, was signed to a two-year deal worth $4 million, $2 million guaranteed. Cleveland declined to tender him as a restricted free agent. Guard Justin McCray was signed to a two-year deal worth $4 million with $500,000 guaranteed. Former Broncos running back Philip Lindsay was signed to a one-year deal worth $3.5 million, $1 million guaranteed. The Broncos wound up actually rescinding the restricted free agent tender on Lindsay, and the Texans swooped in to get him. Former Seahawks center Justin Britt was signed to a one-year deal worth $3.2 million, up to $5,500,000 guaranteed. Britt missed all the 2020 season with a torn ACL that he suffered during the 2019 season. The Seahawks released him after the 2020 draft, and no one signed him. He did work out for a few teams, but he had been unsigned since then until the Texans signed him, I think, sometime this February. Linebacker Christian Kirksey, former Brown and Packer, was signed to a one-year deal worth $3 million, $500,000 guaranteed. Kirksey was released by the Green Bay Packers. He's dealt with injuries in each of his past 3 seasons in the league, which have kind of hampered him, as otherwise he's a pretty solid player. Slot cornerback Desmond King was signed to a one-year deal worth $3 million, $500,000 guaranteed. King was traded from the LA Chargers to the Tennessee Titans at the trade deadline last year. He's one of the better slot corners in the league. Linebacker Camu Grugier-Hill, former Patriot, Eagle, and Dolphin, was signed to a one-year deal worth $2.5 million, $1 million guaranteed. He missed a lot of last year due to injury, but he's one of the better coverage linebackers in the game. Running back Mark Ingram was signed to a one-year deal worth $2.5 million, up to $3 million with $500,000 guaranteed after he was released by the Ravens. Quarterback Jeff Driscoll was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.75 million with $750,000 guaranteed. Former Bronco, former 49er, former Bengal, and former Lion. Safety Terrence Brooks was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.75 million, $250,000 guaranteed. He's a key special teamer he's played for the Patriots, the Jets, and the Eagles. Linebacker Neville Hewitt, former New York Jet and Dolphin, was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.7 million, up to $2 million with $700,000 guaranteed. And he started a bunch of games for the Jets the past couple of years. Wide receiver Chris Conley was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.5 million, fully guaranteed, and it's worth up to $2 million. Former Jaguar and Chief. He was pretty solid for the Jags in 2019, but kind of quiet last year. Defensive tackle DeMarcus Walker was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.5 million, $800,000 guaranteed, former Bronco. Defensive tackle Vincent Taylor, former Dolphin, was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.5 million with $600,000 guaranteed. Wide receiver Chris Moore, former Raven, who can also return kicks, was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.5 million with $500,000 guaranteed. Linebacker Joe Thomas, former Cowboy, was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.5 million with $250,000 guaranteed. Veteran running back Rex Burkhead, former Patriot and Bengal, was signed to a one-year deal, $1.5 million, $125,000 guaranteed. Former Vikings defensive tackle Jaleel Johnson was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.3 million, up to $1.55 million, $400,000 guaranteed. Linebacker Tay Davis was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.25 million, up to $1.4 million, $250,000 guaranteed. Former Brown. Former Bengals receiver Alex Erickson was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.2 million, $500,000 guaranteed. Erickson can also factor into the return game. Wide receiver Dante Moncrief was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.15 million with $50,000 guaranteed. Moncrief has bounced around the league since leaving the Colts. He's been with the Steelers, he's been with the Panthers, he's been with the Jets, he's been with the Patriots. He's worked out for a bunch of teams, but but he has not been able to do much ever since his days in Indy. Former Packers guard Lane Taylor was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.1275 million with $400,000 guaranteed. He's coming off of I think an ACL injury that he suffered in Week 1 of the 2020 season. Tight end Anthony Auclair, former Buccaneer, was signed to a one-year deal, also worth a minimum $350,000 guaranteed. Cornerback Tremon Smith, who also is a returner, was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.1 million with $280,000 guaranteed. Edge rusher Derek Rivers, former Patriot and Ram, was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.1 million with $100,000 guaranteed. Special teamer linebacker Hardy Nickerson was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.1 million with $50,000 guaranteed, former Bengal and Viking. Offensive lineman Cole Toner was signed to a one-year deal worth $1.0575 million with $57.5 thousand guaranteed. Receiver Taywan Taylor, former Titan and Brown, was signed to a one-year deal worth $990,000. Former Jets safety Shyheim Carter was signed to a one-year deal worth $660,000. And their one notable waiver claim was Jerron Christian, former third-round pick of the Washington football team. So again, that was the theme of the offseason for Caserio. And there are some guys here that could wind up being some really good signings and have good value, like King and Taylor, for example, if Taylor's healthy. Jaguars cut a lot of players. Most notably, they released former face of the franchise J.J. Watt, who's been excellent for them since 2011. One of the best players to ever play for the young franchise. This season will be its 20th season. And they could have traded Watt and at least gotten a decent draft pick, but they elected to release him in order that he could control where he signed with, and he elected to sign with the Arizona Cardinals. Running back Duke Johnson Jr., who was one of the players that Bill O'Brien traded draft capital to acquire, was released. He remains unsigned. Center Nick Martin was cut, and he signed with the Raiders. Guard Zach Fulton signed with the New York Giants. Their other guard, Senio Calamete, was released as well. Tight end Darren Fells was released. He has since signed with the Lions, who he played for in 2017. Punter Brian Anger was released after they brought in Johnston. They cut wide receiver Stephen Mitchell. Linebacker Peter Kalambai, who signed with the Denver Broncos. Cornerback Mark Fields. Fullback Colin Gillespie, who suffered a back injury last year. He signed with the New York Giants. Wide receiver Damian Ratley. Defensive tackle Andrew Brown. Wide receiver Chad Hansen. And then quarterback Josh McCown, who was on the practice squad for a lot of last year, and then he might have gotten called up. McCown, actually, interestingly, was a candidate. He was interviewed for the head coaching job, but obviously they ended up hiring Coley. But that was pretty interesting, as he'd be making the jump straight from player to head coach. For their free agent departures, their biggest loss was Will Fuller, their first-round pick in 2016. He signed a one-year deal with the Dolphins. Backup quarterback A.J. McCarron signed a one-year deal with the Atlanta Falcons. Linebacker Tyrell Adams, who got a bunch of starts last year due to injuries, signed with the Buffalo Bills. Edge rusher Brennan Scarlett also signed with Miami. Defensive lineman Carlos Watkins signed with the Dallas Cowboys. The Texans wound up rescinding the restricted free agent tender they placed on defensive tackle P.J. Hall. He is unsigned as of right now. Safety Geno Stone was non-tendered as an exclusive rights free agent, and he signed out with the Ravens, his original team. For their unsigned free agents, you've got former first-round pick of the Raiders, Garyon Conley, who was another trade acquisition by BOB. Conley missed all of last year due to injury. They also have linebacker Dylan Cole, cornerback Philip Gaines, special teamer safety Michael Thomas, not to be confused with the New Orleans Saints wide receiver, linebacker Kyle Emanuel, and offensive lineman Brent Kowale. Caserio executed quite a few trades on his first year on the job as well. First off, he traded away linebacker Bernardrick McKinney, who was injured for a good chunk of last year, along with a 7th-round pick to the Dolphins. In return, they acquired edge rusher Shaq Lawson and a 6th-round pick. McKinney's been pretty solid for the Texans throughout his career, but the problem is that he and their other linebacker, Zach Cunningham. Both of them are good against the run, but not very good in coverage. And with Cunningham getting extended before the start of last season by the organization, they basically had to break the duo up. And Lawson was pretty good his last year with the Bills in 2019, but was not really a scheme fit in Miami, so he'll be going back to the 4-3 system with the Texans. Then they acquired offensive lineman Marcus Cannon from the New England Patriots, along with a 5th-round pick and a 6th-round pick, giving up a 4th-rounder and a 6th-rounder to do so. Cannon opted out of last season for New England, and his replacement was outstanding, so the Patriots decided to move on. Cannon's play has also been declining as of late as he gets older, but he's still pretty solid. He's a good guy in the locker room as well. They did a separate trade with New England. They picked up tight end Ryan Izzo from the Pats for a 7th-round pick in 2022. Izzo's gotten quite a bit of playing time the past couple of years after the retirement to Rob Gronkowski, but he has been nowhere near as effective as a replacement for him. And Izzo was a guy that was going to be cut by the Patriots, but the Texans decided to come in and trade for him. Another player who was about to be cut, but the Texans decided to trade for him, was Bengals quarterback Ryan Finley. They acquired him in a pick swap, sending their 6th-round pick to Cincinnati to get Finley and a 7th. Finley has been, safe to say, very, very bad in the games that he started for the Bengals. He has one career win, and that was against the Steelers when they were in that slump, and that was more because the Bengals defense played outstanding. The Steelers offense couldn't get anything going that game. And the Texans have since cut Ryan Finley, actually. However, I would not be surprised to see them re-sign Finley if Deshaun Watson is unavailable for training camp, just to have another guy in there. The Texans had just 5 draft picks as a result of all the trades that Bill O'Brien and Caserio ended up doing. No 1st or 2nd-round picks, which obviously having the number 3 overall pick, if they did have that, would have been very helpful. So their first pick, with the 3rd pick in this 3rd round, they took quarterback Davis Mills from Stanford. So another guy in the quarterback mix there. They traded up into the 3rd round to take receiver Nico Collins out of Michigan with the 25th pick in the 3rd round. With the 3rd pick in the 5th round, they took tight end Braven Jordan, who many thought was a mid-round pick, but he slipped all the way down there. Linebacker Garrett Wallow was taken with the 26th pick in the 5th round, and defensive tackle Roy Lopez was taken with the 11th pick in the 6th round. So, yeah, they also did several in draft day trades. They have not signed any players to extensions as of yet, which I guess is not really surprising given it's a new regime. For injuries, they waived defensive tackle Eddie Vanderdoes with an injured designation. He opted out of last season, and they have not disclosed a reason why he was, or the injury for that. So my thoughts on the offseason. Obviously with the way the Texans collapsed last year, and then immediately after Deshaun Watson whispers of his discontent in the organization, and then finally requesting a trade, that kind of made it to where their offseason was never really going to be that great in the first place. But then then the Texans were going to stand firm, and then during that time period, Watson was then accused of sexual assault and harassment 22 times. And so, and obviously no team's going to trade for Watson until they know, until they know for a fact that, or until they're settled one way or the other. And, so there's a good, and the most likely scenario that seems to happen is that unless Watson's lawyer and the lawyer who's representing all the women who accused him, who accused Watson of everything awful that he's done, unless they're able to settle out of court, the first court appearance is not going to be until next February, so not until after the Super Bowl. which means the most likely scenario that's going to happen is Deshaun Watson reports to training camp and does not hold out because otherwise he'd get fined. But then he gets placed in the commissioner's exempt list, which is a paid leave. He gets paid, but he can't play. So that seems to be the most likely scenario for what's going to happen there. So that's So we'll see exactly what happens. Watson's not showing up at OTAs, likely because A, the team has likely asked him to stay away, and B, because Watson still wants out of Houston. But again, unless all those lawsuits are settled before the season, I would not expect Watson to get traded until 2022. And even then, it depends on how serious, does he have to serve any jail time, and how long would he get suspended by the league? So aside from Deshaun Watson, I mean, I think Caserio and Coley did a fairly decent job with the limited resources they had to work with from a cap perspective and from a draft perspective. But the problem is that now they don't have a whole ton of talent, and with all these veteran cheap players on short-term deals, this is a roster that very likely will look completely different in the next couple of years. So so the Texans off season, I'm gonna have to give it a C-. So that's really the best I can do, as a lot of people feel like the Texans are one of the worst teams in the NFL right now, and I would, to a certain extent, I would agree, and especially with Deshaun Watson not playing none of the other quarterbacks in there really inspire confidence, unless Mills looks really, really good coming out of camp, I guess. So the Texans' projected starters, assuming Watson does get placed in the commissioner's exempt list, that means that the starting job likely goes down to Tyrod Taylor or Davis Mills. Running back, they have three guys who could be in the mix to start there, between David Johnson, who took a pay cut to stay with the team, and then Ingram and Lindsey. Left tackle will be Laramie Tunsil. Left guard, I think, will be a competition between Max Sharping and Lane Taylor. Justin Britt will definitely start at center. Right guard will be Cannon, and then right tackle Titus Howard. Wide receiver, Brandon Cooks. I think Kikute right now is the leading candidate to start on the outside, but an impressive camp by Nico Collins or someone else could certainly make the Texans go to them instead. Kute did seem to come on at the end of last year, though, so we'll see if he can carry that over. And then veteran Randall Cobb in the slot. Jordan Akins looks like he'll start at tight end, but he could face competition from Jordan or Kahale Warring or Izzo. On the defensive line, which will be shifting to a 4-3 scheme, we'll have Shaq Lawson, Malik Collins, Brandon Dunn, and then off the other edge, probably Charles Omenihu. Linebacker will be, if I were to guess, it would be Christian Kirksey, Zach Cunningham, and Camo Grucher-Hill. Cornerback will be Bradley Roby, I think Terrence Mitchell, and then Desmond King in the slot. The caveat being is that Roby is suspended the first game of the season. And then safety, Justin Reed and Eric Murray. So competition at a whole bunch of positions. Offensive line, running back, quarterback, tight end, maybe receiver, definitely linebacker, and definitely defensive line as well, as they don't really have a whole ton of core players. Like the only core players I would really argue that they have are probably Reed, Cunningham, Cooks, and even then Cooks had his contract restructured, and he's going to be a free agent in a year or two. Tunsil definitely. Howard is likely one. And otherwise, there's a bunch of guys on expiring deals or soon to expire deals. So that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and stay tuned for the next off-season preview video.